Coming up, another episode of The Deep Dive, exploring radical ideas. A podcast produced by Bob Rash.
That delivers a logical analysis of objective reality, grounded in rational principles. We will explore relevant facts and radical ideas based on the axiomatic principles of identity, causality, and consciousness, on reason as an absolute, on rational self-interest as a moral guide, and on the ideals of privacy, freedom, and justice.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a really close look at some source material concerning the Israel-Gaza conflict, and these aren't your typical geopolitical takes.
No, not at all. These sources frame the whole thing in, well, intensely philosophical terms, existential, really.
Exactly. So our job today, our mission, is to guide you through this very specific analysis. The authors here present this stark, uncompromising duality.
They call it a clash between civilization and barbarism. Not a land dispute, but something much deeper, an integrated existential struggle.
It's a powerful way to frame it, definitely stark. And these sources really push us to look at Hamas differently, not just as a group, but as a functioning state entity.
Right, and they want us to examine the chaos inside Gaza, the power vacuum, and also step back and look at the history of Western responses. You know, appeasement versus moral courage as they see it.
And we should be really clear up front, we're exploring the logic presented in these sources. We're unpacking their specific claims for you.
Absolutely. And to get to the heart of their argument, they say we have to start with one specific moment. The moment that defines the conflict for them, October 7th, 2023.
Okay, so October 7th as the foundational moment. The sources are adamant that what happened then wasn't.
Well, it wasn't just terrorism as usual, or even common crime like murder or kidnapping.
Oh, they label it very specifically. An act of war and a crime against humanity.
What's the distinction they're drawing there? Why is that so important to their framework?
It's crucial because they argue this wasn't just a few extremists. They describe it as an operation by soldiers recruited in the population of Gaza.
Soldiers with a mission.
Yes, and according to the sources, that mission wasn't military targets or negotiation. It was, and I'm quoting their analysis here, to indiscriminately invade, kill, kidnap, and destroy civilians.
Innocent people.
Innocent people. The scale and that specific goal destruction itself, that's what elevates it in this view, from terrorism to a kind of formalized war waged by what they call a state apparatus. And they provide this incredibly disturbing anecdote to illustrate what they call the barbaric mindset. The story of the terrorist Mahmoud.
Yes, this intercepted call. They use it to show what they see as a complete disconnect from, well, civilized morality.
He calls his parents.
After killing people, yes. He calls them using the phone of a woman he had just murdered. Just think about that for a second. The intimacy of using her phone to celebrate? It's chilling.
And he wasn't boasting about military gains.
No. He tells his father, I killed at least 10 Jews with my own hands. He's seeking praise, the source says, wants to be seen as a hero.
And when his father suggests maybe he should come back.
He refuses, completely rejects it. He asks his father, what is wrong with you, victory or martyrdom? He even says his mother brought him into the world to fight for religion. And that's the core point for these sources. The violence isn't just a tool for politics. It's framed as a moral end in itself. Religious virtue through killing. They argue this mindset, seeing martyrdom and genocide of the infidels as the highest good, is the very definition of barbarism. It's an inversion of Enlightenment values.
Which leads directly into how they analyze the power structure in Gaza. They argue Hamas isn't separate, that Gaza itself is a de facto state and the enemy.
Yes, they're very clear on this. Forget the idea of just a terror group. Hamas is the infrastructure.
How so?
They say Hamas is the government, the army, the police, the Ministry of Health, and crucially, the Ministry of Education.
Why single out the Ministry of Education? Why is that so critical to the argument?
Because it shows total control. A terror cell needs guns, right? But a state, as they define it, needs institutions to manage people and push the ideology.
The education system shapes the future.
Exactly. By controlling what kids learn, Hamas ensures the next generation grows up believing in that same victory or martyrdom mindset Mahmoud showed. It fuses the military, political, and ideological goals right into Gaza's structure.
So under this analysis, Gaza ticks the boxes for statehood. Territory, people, history, institutions, government, borders.
And they argue its neighbors basically acknowledge this.
How?
Two main examples.
Yeah.
First, Israel's 2005 withdrawal, pulling out settlers, handing over infrastructure that implicitly ceded sovereignty, the sources claim.
Okay. And the second?
Egypt, building that massive border barrier.
Yeah.
You don't build something like that against just a terror group. You build it against a hostile neighboring state. The only real link left was the smuggling tunnels,
Which Hamas used.
which the Gazan army Hamas used to bring in weapons and supplies. It reinforced the idea of Gaza as a separate, militarized entity.
So if you accept that premise, two state entities, one defined by this barbaric ideology, then the conflict fundamentally changes. It's not about land anymore.
It becomes existential by their definition, rooted in these opposing worldviews. One side, they say, represents secular, rational, individualistic, capitalistic enlightenment,
And the other?
characterizes tyrannical, bloody, warmongering theocracies driven by a kind of collective nihilism, where martyrdom is the goal.
So the civilizational goal here, according to these sources, isn't just winning a battle, it's much bigger.
Oh, it's huge. It requires changing the entire opposing system, bringing Enlightenment values, reason, individualism to what they call the medieval and barbaric culture next door.
How do they see that happening?
Two tracks: military justice for those who committed violence, and then long-term philosophical education for the future generations, like denazification after World War II, but aimed at this specific ideology. The war isn't for territory, it's for, well, for reason itself.
Okay, so that sets up the external conflict in their view.
Yeah.
But the sources also delve into what happens inside Gaza when that external pressure eases up, even partially.
Right. They talk about the partial IDF withdrawal from places like Netzarim in the central area, and what happens immediately, a security vacuum.
And Hamas fills it.
Instantly.
Yeah.
And the tactical shift is fascinating. During the main fighting, the sources note, Hamas fighters deliberately blended in, wore civilian clothes, using Western rules of engagement against them.
To avoid being targeted as combatants.
Precisely. But the moment the IDF pulled back from certain areas, Hamas fighters reportedly emerged from tunnels, but this time in full military gear.
Sending a clear message.
A very clear message. We're back. We're in charge. But they didn't use that presence to rebuild. They used it to launch an internal purge.
This campaign of security, they mention, sounds ominous.
It is a classic authoritarian move, right? Use security as a pretext to crush rivals who tried to gain influence while Hamas was focused on the external fight.
Who were they targeting?
Rival clans, local gangs, groups like the Dogmush clan who have a pretty notorious history. These groups apparently tried to step into the power vacuum.
So it wasn't just criminal stuff, it was a fight for control.
Absolutely. A fight for political and economic power within Gaza.
And what justifications did Hamas use for going after them so harshly?
The usual playbook, according to the sources, accusations like collaboration with Israel, obviously, also parallel coordination and security, basically, setting up their own little power bases.
Undermining Hamas authority.
Exactly. And then the really key one, accusations around the distribution of humanitarian aid, plus general extortion of the population during the chaos.
And these weren't just arrests, were they? The sources cite actual casualty numbers.
Yes, numbers reported by Reuters, citing Palestinian security sources. Pretty grim figures. 32 members of these rival clans or gangs killed, 24 arrested, 30 injured. And significantly, 6 Hamas agents were also killed in these clashes.
So it was a real internal fight, not just a crackdown.
Definitely a bloody two-sided conflict. It confirms, in the source's view, that as soon as external pressure lifts, the internal power struggles erupt violently.
And it wasn't just organized groups. They mentioned the execution of a journalist or influencer, Saleh al-Farari.
Yeah, in Gaza City. The reports cited are a bit unclear whether it was Hamas directly or a rival militia. But the point the sources make is it shows total lawlessness. Any independent voice, any separate power base, even one just focused on getting aid out, becomes a threat that needs silencing.
Which brings us right to this aid power nexus. Why is controlling humanitarian aid so critical that it sparks internal warfare?
Because when everything else is destroyed, aid is the economy. It's the only currency that matters.
Control food, control the power.
Pretty much. It gives you resources, political clout, popular support, or at least dependence. And crucially, the sources argue, it's an inexhaustible source of income through fees, tolls, black markets, extortion.
So when these rival clans tried to muscle in on aid distribution, maybe even negotiate directly with outside actors.
They weren't just trying to feed people. They were challenging Hamas's fundamental control, its revenue stream, its very authority as the governing power.
And Hamas couldn't tolerate that.
No. They had to send in forces, like this group called the SAM, to crush the competition, the so-called looters, and reestablish their monopoly. It just reinforces the source's picture of a system built purely on coercive control over basic survival needs.
Let's shift to maybe the most challenging argument in these sources, the one that really pushes against common Western assumptions. That's the critique of altruism.
Right. They argue that sending massive amounts of humanitarian aid, they mention figures like 600 trucks a day to the Palestinians, is, quote, altruism and self-sacrifice.
Self-sacrifice. How so?
Because in their view, you're directly supplying an enemy that is explicitly dedicated to your destruction. Israel's destruction in this case.
So giving aid strengthens the enemy.
That's the core of it. The sources go so far as to call the reported food crisis largely a farce, essentially Hamas propaganda amplified by sympathetic media. They insist the aid primarily fuels Hamas's power and income.
Okay, but let me push back here from a listener's point of view. We see images, we hear stories of immense suffering, potential starvation. Isn't cutting off aid just? Condemning innocent civilians? How does this framework justify that?
It's a harsh logic. The sources argue you have to judge actions by their ultimate consequence, not the immediate feeling. Supplying aid, in their view, props up the system, the Hamas regime, that perpetuates the conflict and guarantees more suffering long term.
So helping individuals now hinders the long-term goal of defeating the barbaric regime.
That's the argument. True morality in this framework means doing what's necessary for civilization's survival and the enemy's ultimate defeat, even if it involves short-term hardship. It's a consequentialist argument, really.
They even criticize Israel's own tactics, saying they waited too long to use aid as leverage.
Yeah, they argue that linking aid shipments to demands like releasing hostages or returning bodies should have happened immediately after October 7th.
Why didn't it, in their view?
They see it as part of that same Western weakness, that fear of wielding necessary power. Treating aid as a pure humanitarian right, rather than a strategic tool, forfeited crucial leverage, according to this analysis.
Okay, so if aid is cut off or severely restricted, the question becomes, how will the Palestinians live? What's the answer from these sources?
It's stark. The population, viewed as enslaved by its own government, must free themselves.
Free themselves from Hamas, not from Israel.
Exactly. But it's deeper than just overthrowing Hamas physically. They argue the population must free itself from the underlying mentality, what they call the primitive, mystical, irrational, barbaric, altruistic, and nihilistic mentality.
Wow. So freedom isn't something given, it's something earned internally.
Precisely. It's a conquest, achieved by embracing reason and rejecting collectivism and nihilism, as the sources frame it, not a gift delivered on aid trucks.
That's a heavy burden to place on a population in that situation. How do they see this self-liberation actually happening? They cite historical mechanisms, right?
Yes. They lay out 3 paths historically seen to overthrow authoritarian regimes. The first is economic collapse.
Like the Soviet Union.
Exactly. The system just crumbles under its own weight. But they add a caveat. Collapse doesn't automatically mean freedom. Look at Russia, post-USSR, still authoritarian.
Okay, what's the second path?
Popular revolt. A mass uprising where people directly confront and fight their own government.
Examples?
They mention the Estonians, Ukrainians, Nepalese. This is seen as the most direct form of self-liberation, people fighting for their own rights.
And the third mechanism?
War. specifically, being defeated by an external liberating force.
Like Germany and Japan in World War II.
Yes, where unconditional surrender is followed by a long-term occupation aimed at fundamentally breaking the old ideology and rebuilding society based on different principles, individual rights, civil government. Without that total defeat and reshaping, the old ideology lingers.
So the ultimate responsibility, according to this analysis, falls squarely on the people of Gaza.
Yes, like people in Iran, Russia, Venezuela, wherever they see similar regimes, they must fight for their own freedom. And the conclusion is incredibly uncompromising.
Which is?
If they don't fight for it, they don't deserve it.
That's incredibly harsh.
It reflects a radical individualist philosophy underpinning these sources. Freedom isn't an entitlement, it's an achievement. If a population remains collectively subservient, even embraces a destructive ideology, these sources see them as complicit in their own situation.
So if the enemy is defined by this irrationality, this barbarism, then the response from the civilized side must be the opposite. The sources argue the war's trajectory changed when Israel shifted fully to using intelligence.
Yes, intelligence defined specifically as rational intelligence applied with moral precision. That phrase is key.
The Enlightenment method applied to warfare.
Exactly. Reason, science, technology, used against what they see as mystical fanaticism. The goal isn't revenge or mass destruction, it's surgical elimination. Neutralizing the enemy leadership and operational capability with precision. Intelligence becomes the ultimate civilized weapon.
And this led to what they call the decapitation strategy, systematically taking out Hamas leaders wherever they are.
Right, using everything available. Satellites, drones, SIGINT, human intelligence on the ground. The message is clear. Nowhere is safe.
That has a huge psychological impact, presumably.
Absolutely. Knowing you could be targeted anywhere, anytime by a precise strike. That's arguably more demoralizing for leadership than indiscriminate bombing.
Let's walk through the examples the sources provide. They start far from Gaza in January 2024.
Right, the strike that killed Salah Aruri, Hamas's political deputy, in Beirut, deep inside Hezbollah territory.
What was the significance of that?
It showed reach, penetrating another country, hitting a high-value target surgically without sparking a massive escalation. It demonstrated advanced intelligence and planning rational foresight.
Then, even bolder, July 2024. Ismail Ramir, the overall political leader, assassinated in Tehran, inside Iran.
That's the ultimate demonstration, isn't it? Hitting the leadership inside their main state sponsor, bypassing Iranian state security. The sources frame this as proof that rationality, advanced tech, and coordination can outmaneuver ideological shields.
Okay, bringing it closer to Gaza again. October 2024, the elimination of Einar, nicknamed the Butcher of Khan Yunis, killed in Rafah.
Tracked via aerial surveillance, ground intel. His elimination is presented as that moral precision in action, taking out a key commander known for brutality, specifically targeted.
And then May 2025, the strike on the European hospital in Khan Yunis, killing Mohammed Sinar and other commanders.
And the sources stress why they were there,
Yeah.
allegedly using the hospital, the civilians, as shields. The ability to strike them there, minimizing collateral damage as much as possible under those circumstances, reinforces the core thesis for these writers.
Civilized intelligence penetrating barbaric tactics.
Precisely. It avoids collective punishment while neutralizing the threat.
The sources really boil this section down to one stark conclusion, the fatal truth for the enemy.
Yes, barbarism can kill innocence, but cannot hide forever from intelligence.
Explain that duality.
Barbarism, in this view, excels at chaotic, indiscriminate violence, killing innocents. But it's ultimately weak against the focused power of reason, science, and technology intelligence, which can methodically hunt down and eliminate the command structure. That, the sources argue, is the only way to truly win.
Okay, so we have the source's definition of the conflict, the enemy, and the required response. But why hasn't this response, this intelligent war, led to a final resolution before? Why does the conflict persist?
The sources point a finger squarely at the West, specifically at what they see as a long history of abandoning moral clarity for political expediency, appeasement, realpolitik, starting right after World War II.
How so? After defeating Nazism.
Their argument is the victorious allies got afraid of their own victory. They shifted from unconditional surrender, victory at any cost, to a new goal, avoiding escalation.
And the consequence?
The Cold War. Millions left under communism because the West, in their view, lacked the courage to push for total liberation. They settled for containment instead of victory.
They contrast the WWII generals like Eisenhower, Patton, MacArthur, who wanted total victory,
With the politicians who pulled them back. Patton wanted to keep going east, and the key moment they highlight is Truman stopping MacArthur in Korea.
MacArthur wanted to defeat China decisively.
Yes, push for total victory. Truman feared a wider war with the Soviets, so he settled for an armistice, a stalemate. That, the sources claim, set the precedent. The West would fight, but always stop short of victory, sacrificing principle for perceived stability.
And this pattern, this moral paralysis, they see embodied in figures like Henry Kissinger and his realpolitik in the 70s. Remind us what realpolitik means in this context.
It means prioritizing power balance, stability, national interest over abstract ideals like morality, truth, or human rights. If cutting a deal with a tyrant keeps things quiet for a while, you do it. The sources see it as moral cowardice dressed up as strategic genius.
And Kissinger's Nobel Peace Prize for the Paris Accords in Vietnam.
They call it a sham. Surrender with another name. Peace was declared. He got the prize. But then Saigon fell. Millions died in the aftermath. Peace built on concessions without victory, they argue, is always fragile and ultimately immoral.
And they connect this directly to Israel's situation, specifically the 1973 Yom Kippur War.
Absolutely. Israel had the Egyptian Third Army surrounded, potentially could have marched on Cairo. A decisive victory was possible.
But Kissinger stepped in.
Yes, pressured Israel to halt. Fear of regional chaos, Soviet intervention. By forcing Israel to stop short, he prevented a true resolution based on defeat of the aggressor. He created what the sources call a fragile equilibrium and cemented this moral paralysis in Western policy towards the region.
And they argue this mistake stopping short has been repeated over and over.
Every single time, they say. 1967, 1973, Lebanon in 1982. Each time an Israeli victory was interrupted, the enemy survived and came back stronger. The PLO survived 82, and Hezbollah emerged from that failure.
And it extends beyond Israel.
They see the same flawed logic in wider U.S. policy, abandoning the Shah in Iran, not removing Saddam in 91. Each time, the fear of total victory just guaranteed a bigger, bloodier conflict down the road.
This historical critique leads them to a really scathing assessment of modern Western culture, particularly academia and media. The Western intellectual collapse.
It's harsh. They argue these institutions have fundamentally forgotten the Enlightenment. They confuse cowardice with diplomacy, mistake brutality with resistance.
Reading too.
Educated nihilism.
Yeah.
The rejection of objective truth and moral values, but propagated by elites who should know better. They see support for radical violence in universities or media as a profound betrayal of Western principles, reason, individual rights, moral clarity.
Which connects to their critique of the Nobel Peace Prize again, the Nobel paradox.
Yeah, the idea that the prize now often rewards surrender or appeasement, not principle of peace. They mentioned Obama getting it early on, based on hope, and they contrast that with the Abraham Accords.
Peace deals based on mutual recognition and strength.
Right, which they argue was truly deserving, but largely ignored by the Nobel Committee. And they predict any potential 2025 deal, like this rumored Sharm el-Sheikh agreement based on concessions.
That kind of deal, born of fear, is exactly what would get a Nobel now, because it prioritizes shaky stability over justice.
Which brings us to their final stark moral mandate. If real peace needs moral clarity and victory,
then dealing with Hamas requires a very specific approach.
Uncompromising. True peace requires total victory over evil. So any deal with terrorists, like a potential 2025 agreement, is only morally acceptable if it's a tactic, a bluff.
A bluff for what purpose?
Solely to get the hostages back. And the moment they're safe, operations must restart immediately to, in their words, annihilate every member of Hamas and associated organizations. Justice and freedom, they argue, must trump temporary, fear-based calm. #outro.
Well, this has been a really intense exploration of a very specific integrated worldview presented in these sources. It insists this isn't just a local conflict.
No, they frame it as a microcosm, a small battleground in a much larger permanent global war between two fundamentally opposed systems of values.
Reason, individualism, the Enlightenment on one side.
Versus mysticism, collectivism, and what they bluntly call barbarism on the other.
And the stakes, according to this material, couldn't be higher. They argue the fight in Gaza is also a fight for Paris, London, Harvard.
A defense of the core principles that originated in Athens and were revitalized in the Enlightenment. To abandon the side of civilization, in their view, is to turn your back on the very light that made us free.
The sources claim civilization's survival hinges not just on military strength, but on remembering why it fights. So the final thought they leave us with for you to consider. What specific Enlightenment principles, maybe rationality, individual rights, the very idea of objective good and evil do you take for granted in your own life and society? And what might defending them truly require? Something to think about.
That's a wrap for this episode of The Deep Dive, exploring radical ideas, grounded in reality, driven by reason, built on self-esteem, rational self-interest, and laissez-faire capitalism, produced by Bob Rash.
We'll be back next week. Until then, stay curious, stay free, and enjoy the music.
The Deep Dive by Bob Rash.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.